What started as a routine late-night interview quickly spiraled into one of television's most explosive confrontations when host Clint Eastwood made a comment that crossed every line, forcing Jimmy Kimmel to take a stand that would shake Hollywood. The studio lights dimmed as the familiar opening theme of Clint Eastwood's late-night talk show filled the air. Behind the curtain, Jimmy Kimmel adjusted his tie one final time, preparing for what he assumed would be another standard promotional appearance. He was there to discuss his upcoming comedy special and share a few laughs with the veteran actor-turned-host. The audience buzzed with anticipation, phones already recording in hopes of capturing a memorable moment between two entertainment heavyweights. Eastwood emerged from backstage with his characteristic swagger, that gravelly voice cutting through the applause as he delivered his opening monologue. His jokes landed with practiced precision, but there was something different in his demeanor tonight, a sharper edge that seemed to hint at confrontation. The audience sensed it too, their laughter carrying an undertone of nervous energy. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jimmy Kimmel," Eastwood announced, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Kimmel bounded onto the stage with his usual enthusiasm, waving to the crowd before settling into the guest chair. The two men shook hands, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. The conversation started pleasantly enough, with Eastwood asking about Kimmel's family and recent projects. But seasoned viewers of both shows could detect an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there in their previous interactions. "So, Jimmy," Eastwood began, leaning back in his chair with a calculating look, "you've been pretty vocal about politics lately. Some might say you've forgotten what your job actually is." Kimmel's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Well, Clint, I think entertainers have always had opinions. We're citizens too, right?" "Citizens, sure," Eastwood replied, his voice taking on that familiar steely tone that had made him famous in westerns. "But there's a difference between having opinions and using your platform to lecture hard-working Americans about how they should think." The studio audience shifted, uncomfortably. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they'd expected. Kimmel straightened in his chair, his comedian's instincts kicking in as he tried to deflect with humor. "Hey, if people don't like what I'm saying, they can always change the channel. Last I checked, we still had remote controls in America." Eastwood's laugh was cold, devoid of any genuine amusement. "That's exactly the problem, Jimmy. You Hollywood types think you're untouchable. You think you can say whatever you want without consequences." The tension in the room was now palpable. Camera operators zoomed in, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Kimmel's publicist, watching from the wings, began furiously, texting someone, likely trying to figure out how to handle what was clearly becoming a hostile interview. "Clint, I'm not sure where this is coming from," Kimmel said, his voice remaining steady despite the obvious provocation. "We've always gotten along. What's really going on here?" Eastwood stood up abruptly, beginning to pace behind his desk like a predator circling its prey. "What's going on is that I'm tired of pretending. Tired of the fake smiles and the phony Hollywood friendships. You want to know what I really think about your little comedy show?" The audience was dead silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Kimmel remained seated, but his body language had changed completely. The relaxed comedian had been replaced by someone preparing for a fight. "I think you've lost touch with real America," Eastwood continued, his voice rising. "You sit in your Beverly Hills mansion, making jokes about people who actually work for a living. You mock their values, their beliefs, their way of life, and then you wonder why they don't find you funny anymore." Kimmel finally stood up, matching Eastwood's energy. "That's not what I do, and you know it. I make fun of politicians and celebrities, including myself. That's what comedians do." "No, Jimmy. That's what Hollywood liberals do. They hide behind comedy, while they tear down everything that made this country great." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Behind the cameras, producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation play out. The ratings potential was enormous, but so was the risk. This was live. Television at its most dangerous. Kimmel's face had gone red, not from embarrassment but from genuine anger. "You know what, Clint? I came here as your guest, thinking we were friends. But if you want to turn this into some kind of political ambush, then let's talk about your politics. Let's talk about some of the things you've said and done that—" "Go ahead," Eastwood interrupted, moving closer to his guest. "Say what's on your mind, Jimmy. Show America who you really are when someone challenges your precious worldview." The studio had become a powder keg, and Kimmel could feel every eye in the room watching his next move. His hands clenched slightly as he processed what was happening. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong, this was a calculated attack, broadcast, live to millions of viewers. "You want to know who I really am?" Kimmel's voice was quiet but filled with controlled fury. "I'm someone who believes in treating people with basic human decency. I'm someone who thinks we can disagree without being disagreeable. But apparently that's not what you're interested in tonight." Eastwood circled back to his desk, but remained standing, his presence looming over the set. "Spare me the sanctimonious speech, Jimmy. We both know this is about power. You and your Hollywood friends think you get to decide what's acceptable, for people to think, what's acceptable for them to say." "That's not—" Kimmel began, but Eastwood cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Let me tell you something about real Americans," Eastwood continued, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "They're tired of being lectured by people who've never worked a real day in their lives. They're tired of being told they're wrong for loving their country, for believing in traditional values." The audience was now completely silent, some looking uncomfortable while others leaned forward with morbid fascination. This was television history in the making, and everyone knew it. Social media was already exploding with clips and commentary, the confrontations spreading across platforms faster than either man could imagine. Kimmel took a deep breath, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. "Clint, I've worked since I was a teenager. I've held real jobs. I understand what it's like to struggle, and I've never told anyone they can't love their country or have traditional values." "But you mock them," Eastwood shot back. "Every night, you get on your little stage and make jokes at their expense. You turn their beliefs into punchlines for your liberal audience to laugh at." "I make jokes about hypocrisy," Kimmel replied, his voice rising to match Eastwood's intensity. "I make jokes about politicians who say one thing and do another. That's not attacking ordinary Americans, that's holding powerful people accountable." Eastwood laughed bitterly. "Accountable? You mean like how you held yourself accountable when you wore blackface? Or how about when you made fun of disabled people? Where was your accountability then, Jimmy?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. Kimmel's face went pale, then flushed red with anger. The audience gasped audibly, and several people could be heard whispering among themselves. This was no longer just a political disagreement. It had become deeply personal. "That was decades ago," Kimmel said through gritted teeth. "I apologized. I learned from my mistakes. I grew as a person. But what you're doing right now, this isn't about holding anyone accountable. This is about humiliating a guest on your show for entertainment." "Entertainment?" Eastwood's voice was mocking now. "This is the most honest conversation that's happened on television in years. For once, someone's telling the truth instead of playing along with Hollywood's little game of pretend." Behind the cameras, producers were in full panic mode. Phone calls were being made to network executives, legal teams were being consulted, and security personnel had been quietly positioned near the stage. Everyone could sense that this situation was spiraling, completely out of control. Kimmel stood up straighter, finding his footing in the confrontation. "You want to talk about truth, Clint? Let's talk about truth. You've spent your entire career playing tough guys on screen. But what are you really? You're an angry old man who can't accept that the world has changed. You're someone who thinks being cruel is the same thing as being strong." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down. Eastwood's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. For a moment it looked like he might actually lose complete control. "You don't know anything about me," Eastwood said, his voice dangerously low. "You don't know what I've been through, what I've seen, what I've sacrificed for this country. And you don't know anything about me either," Kimmel fired back. "But that didn't stop you from ambushing me on live television with personal attacks. That didn't stop you from trying to destroy my reputation for your own sick entertainment." The confrontation had reached a breaking point. Both men were now standing, facing each other across the small space between the desk and guest chair. The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating, and everyone in the studio could feel that something was about to give. Eastwood took a step closer, his weathered face twisted with contempt. "You want to call me an angry old man? Fine, but at least I'm not a coward hiding behind a desk, making cheap shots at people who can't fight back." "Cheap shots?" Kimmel's voice cracked with disbelief. "You invited me here as your guest, and you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to destroy me on live television. And you're calling me the coward?" The studio audience was now visibly uncomfortable. Several people had gotten up to leave, while others were frantically recording everything on their phones. The energy in the room had shifted from entertainment to something much darker and more primal. "I'm giving you exactly what you deserve," Eastwood snarled. "You've been dishing it out for years, hiding behind your writers and your laugh track. Now you get to see what it feels like when someone fights back." Kimmel's hands were shaking now. Whether from anger or adrenaline, no one could tell. "This isn't fighting back, Clint. This is bullying. This is what weak people do when they can't handle honest criticism." "Weak?" Eastwood's voice rose to nearly a shout. "I've been in this business longer than you've been alive. I've earned everything I have through blood, sweat, and talent. Not by sucking up to the right people and reading jokes off a teleprompter." "At least I don't ambush my guests," Kimmel shot back. "At least I don't invite people onto my show just to humiliate them." "What kind of host does that? What kind of person does that?" The accusation seemed to hit a nerve. Eastwood's composure, which had been slipping throughout the confrontation, finally cracked completely. His face turned red with rage, and for a moment, he looked like he might actually physically attack his guest. "You want to know what kind of person I am?" Eastwood roared. "I'm the kind of person who tells the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I'm the kind of person who doesn't pretend to be something I'm not to please a bunch of Hollywood phonies." "The truth?" Kimmel laughed bitterly. "The truth is that you're jealous. You're jealous that comedy has moved past your generation. You're jealous that people don't find your brand of masculinity impressive anymore. You're a relic, Clint, and you can't stand it." The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Eastwood's face went from red to almost purple, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. The cameras captured every moment of his loss of control, broadcasting his humiliation to millions of viewers. "How dare you?" Eastwood whispered, his voice filled with venom. "How dare you come into my house and disrespect me like that?" "Your house?" Kimmel's voice was incredulous. "This is a television studio, not your personal kingdom. And newsflash, you don't get to treat people like garbage just because you're the host." Behind them, the show's producers were frantically signaling to cut to commercial, but Eastwood waved them off aggressively. He was too far gone now, his need for confrontation overriding any sense of professional judgment. "I built this show," Eastwood continued, spittle flying from his lips. "I earned my place here through decades of hard work, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let some late-night comedian tell me how to run it." "Then maybe you shouldn't have invited that comedian as your guest," Kimmel replied coldly. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to turn this into your personal therapy session." The audience was now almost completely silent, watching in horrified fascination as two entertainment icons destroyed each other on live television. Several more people had left their seats, and security personnel were now clearly visible at the edges of the set. Eastwood suddenly slammed his hand down on his desk, the sharp crack echoing through the studio like a gunshot. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've got it all figured out. But you're nothing, Jimmy. You're a nobody who got lucky. And you're a has-been who can't accept that his time is over," Kimmel fired back without hesitation. "You're so desperate to stay relevant that you'll attack your own guests on live television. That's not strength, Clint. That's pathetic." The insult hung in the air like a death sentence. Eastwood's face went completely white, then red again, his entire body trembling with rage. For several long seconds neither man spoke, the silence more deafening than any shouting had been. When Eastwood finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than all his previous shouting combined. "Get out!" "What?" Kimmel asked, though he'd heard perfectly well. "I said get out," Eastwood repeated, his voice growing stronger. "Get out of my studio, get out of my show, get out of my sight." The command echoed through the silent studio like a death knell. Kimmel stood frozen for a moment, processing what had just happened. Never in his decades of television experience had he been kicked off a show, let alone in such a public and humiliating manner. "Fine," Kimmel said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "But before I go, let me say something to your audience." He turned away from Eastwood and faced the cameras directly, his expression serious but composed. The contrast between his dignified demeanor and Eastwood's continued rage was stark and telling. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kimmel began, his voice carrying across the stunned studio, "what you've witnessed tonight isn't entertainment. It's a man who's lost control of himself and his show. This isn't what television should be. This isn't how guests should be treated. And frankly, this isn't how human beings should treat each other." "Don't you dare lecture my audience," Eastwood snarled, moving toward Kimmel aggressively. "Security! Get him out of here now!" But Kimmel held his ground, continuing to address the cameras. "I came here tonight thinking I was going to have a friendly conversation with a colleague. Instead, I was ambushed, attacked, and humiliated by someone who clearly has deeper issues than I can help him with." Security personnel finally moved onto the set, but they seemed uncertain about how to handle the situation. This wasn't a standard security issue. This was two major celebrities having a very public breakdown on live television. "You want me gone, Clint?" "I'm gone," Kimmel said, finally turning back to face his host. "But I want everyone watching to remember this moment. Remember what happens when someone's ego becomes more important than their professionalism. Remember what it looks like when power corrupts completely." Eastwood's face was now a mask of pure hatred. "You self-righteous piece of—" "No," Kimmel interrupted, holding up his hand. "I'm done. I'm done with your insults, your attacks, and your pathetic need to tear other people down to make yourself feel important. This conversation is over." With that, Kimmel began walking toward the exit, his head held high despite the circumstances. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of television's most respected comedians maintained his dignity while being publicly humiliated. But Eastwood wasn't finished. His need for the last word, his desperate desire to win this confrontation, overrode whatever remained of his professional judgment. "That's right, run away," he shouted after Kimmel. "Run back to your liberal friends and cry about how the mean old man hurt your feelings. That's what you people do. You dish it out, but you can't take it." Kimmel stopped walking. He turned around one final time, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and devastating in its quiet authority. "You know what, Clint? You're right about one thing. I can't take it. I can't take watching someone I used to respect destroy himself on live television. I can't take being part of whatever this has become, and I can't take pretending that what happened here tonight was anything other than a sad, pathetic display by a man who's forgotten what it means to be decent." The words hit Eastwood like physical blows. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. For the first time in the entire confrontation, He seemed to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. "This isn't strength," Kimmel continued, his voice carrying easily through the silent studio. "This isn't tough. This is what weakness looks like when it's dressed up as power. And frankly, I feel sorry for you." With that final statement, Kimmel turned and walked off the set. The cameras followed him as he moved through the backstage area, past stunned crew members and horrified producers. His composure never broke, even as the magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. Behind him, Eastwood stood alone on his set, surrounded by uncomfortable silence. The audience began to murmur among themselves, many looking disgusted by what they'd witnessed. Some were already heading for the exits, clearly wanting no part of whatever came next. The show's director, finally breaking from his shocked paralysis, began frantically signaling to cut to commercial. But the damage was already done. The confrontation had been broadcast live to millions of viewers, and within minutes, clips would be circulating across every social media platform. As Kimmel reached his dressing room, he could hear Eastwood attempting to regain control of his show, but his voice sounded hollow and desperate. The spell had been broken. The illusion of the controlled, authoritative host had been shattered completely. Kimmel gathered his things quickly, ignoring the attempts by various staff members to speak with him. His publicist was already on the phone, doing damage control, while his security detail prepared to escort him out of the building. The entertainment industry machine was already spinning into action, preparing for the fallout that would inevitably follow. As he left the studio, Kimmel could see the first news vans already arriving outside. The story was spreading faster than wildfire, and by morning, it would dominate every entertainment news program in the country. The confrontation would be analyzed, dissected, and debated for months to come. Within hours, social media exploded with support for Kimmel and condemnation of Eastwood's behavior. The hashtag #RespectYourGuests began trending worldwide, and clips of Kimmel's dignified exit were shared millions of times. Public opinion was swift and decisive. Eastwood had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The aftermath was brutal for Eastwood's career. Sponsors began pulling out of his show within days, and network executives were forced to address the public relations nightmare. His ratings plummeted as viewers expressed their disgust with his conduct, and industry colleagues began distancing themselves from the toxic brand he'd created. For Kimmel, the incident became a defining moment of grace under pressure. His composed response to unprecedented hostility earned him widespread respect and admiration, cementing his reputation as a class act in an industry often lacking in dignity. The confrontation that was meant to destroy him instead elevated his standing in Hollywood and beyond. The night that was supposed to be routine late-night television entertainment had instead become a cautionary tale about the importance of professionalism, respect, and basic human decency in the entertainment industry.